Ever wondered how you can lock down your Microsoft Teams, SharePoint sites, and Power BI workspaces with just one label? In this episode, I'll show you how sensitivity labels can do exactly that, so you can take the control you need over your collaboration spaces with precision and control. So welcome back to this SC401 exam prep series, and this part 8, we're diving into how to apply sensitivity labels to containers like Teams, SharePoint, Power BI, and Microsoft 365 groups. So let's start by explaining what are containers. Well, in Microsoft Purview, which is where we are standing by to explore, containers refer to collaborative environments like Microsoft Teams for chat and meetings, SharePoint Online for document libraries and sites, Power BI workspaces for data analytics and dashboards, and Microsoft 365 groups, which underpin Teams and other collaborative services. Applying sensitivity labels to these containers helps enforce access controls, external sharing restrictions, and privacy settings at the workspace level. To apply labels to containers, you need to create group and site labels in Microsoft Purview. These differ slightly from file and email labels, which we created in the previous video. So to do this, you go to the Purview Compliance portal, you go to Information Protection and Labels from the Solutions area, and you can either create a new label and enable the option to apply label to groups and sites, as you'll see on the screen here, or you can do what I'm doing here and edit an existing label. I'm editing the super confidential label that we created in the previous video. And we can configure settings like the ones here that apply to Teams, groups, and sites that have this label applied. They don't apply directly to the files stored in those containers, and that's key. That protection does not filter down to the item level. This is purely at, as it says on the tin, container level. We can configure privacy and external user access. If we select this, this will control the level of access that internal and external users will have to labeled Teams and Microsoft 365 groups. We can select external sharing and conditional access to control external sharing and configure conditional access settings to protect labeled SharePoint sites. And we can select private Teams, discoverability, and shared channel settings. Next, we can choose auto apply settings to apply a label to channel meetings. For Teams channels that have this label applied, you can also select a label to automatically apply to any meetings created from the channel. Users won't be able to change or remove the label. So here we can click the drop down and we can select one of our labels. I'll select this super confidential one again for this example. We can click on next, and then we can define the privacy and external user access settings. So for all the three settings that we configured above, we get more settings to configure here. So we can choose what our privacy level is going to be. That internal and external users will have to labeled Teams and M365 groups. These options apply to all M365 groups and Teams that have this label applied, and when applied, these settings will replace any existing privacy settings for the team or group. If the label is removed, users can change it again. And there are three settings: public, which is for anyone in your organization who can access the group or team, including content, and add members. Private allows only team owners and members to access the group or team, and only owners can add members, and non-team and group members can set the privacy settings themselves. So we will leave this one as public. You can also choose an option for external user access here to let Microsoft 365 group owners add people outside your organization to the group as guests if you want. So that is purely an optional setting. Click on next and we move down to the next one, the external sharing and conditional access. And here we can control who can share SharePoint content with people outside your organization and decide whether users can access labeled sites from unmanaged devices. We can check the first box to control external sharing from labeled SharePoint sites. And when this label is applied to a SharePoint site, these settings will replace external existing sharing settings configured for the site. And you can choose that the content can be shared with anyone, new and existing guests, or only people inside your organization. So there we go. We can make the selection we want here. I'll choose only people in your organization. You can also select Use Microsoft Entra Conditional Access to protect labeled SharePoint sites. You can either control the level of access users have from unmanaged devices or select an existing authentication context to enforce restrictions. So here we can choose determine whether users can access SharePoint sites from unmanaged devices, which are devices that aren't Microsoft Entra hybrid joined, or enroll them in Intune. And for this setting to work, you must also configure the SharePoint feature that blocks or limits access to SharePoint files from unmanaged devices. You can allow full access from desktop apps, mobile apps, and the web, or allow limited web-only access, or you can choose to block access altogether. Or instead of determining at this stage here, you can choose this option here to choose an existing authentication context. Each context has a Microsoft Entra conditional access policy applied to enforce restrictions. And you can learn more about authentication context here to study up more on it. And we can see by dropping down, what we're going to get here is confidential label require MFA when confidential label applied to SharePoint site require MFA. So we can tie in nicely to conditional access there. For this example, I will continue to use the top option instead of the conditional access one, but find out which one works for you and be sure you know the difference between these for the exam, as you may be tested on it. Click on Next, and the final of the three options that we want to configure, private teams discoverability and shared channel controls. And this helps you to decide whether labeled private teams will be discoverable in searches and control how channels can be shared with other teams. For private team discoverability, we can check whether to allow users to discover private teams that have this label applied. And when selected, any user assigned to a Teams policy that has private Teams discovery turned on can search and discover private teams that have this label applied. Clear this option to prevent those users from discovering these labeled private teams. We've also got some options here for Teams shared channels to control types of teams that can be invited to shared channels in labeled teams. These settings don't affect invitations to individual users. We have the choice between internal only, and when selected, external teams can't be invited to shared channels. This setting doesn't affect teams that were invited to shared channels before the label was applied. We can choose same label only, and when selected, only teams with this label applied can be invited to shared channels. This setting doesn't affect teams from other organizations or teams that were invited to shared channels before the label was applied. And finally, we have the option for private teams only, and when selected, public teams, including external public teams, cannot be invited to shared channels, and any previously invited public teams are removed when the label is applied. If an invited team's privacy setting is changed from private to public, it is removed from the channel. So we can make the choice here that we want. For this example, I'll put private teams only and click on Next. Now, what you'll see here is that it's not going to allow you to do certain combinations. We can see the validation failed here. The label does not allow external user access in privacy and external user settings. So kindly enable restrict to internal only control to proceed. So we've got a conflict there. So we're going to have to select internal only to get past this point. So be aware of those settings that may contradict each other. You can save your label, the label is updated, and you are good to go. Next, you can publish the label via a label policy, as we did in the previous video, so I won't show you that again, and target the users who create Teams, SharePoint sites, M365 groups, or Power BI workspaces. And do make a note that these labels are scoped to containers and differ from file email labels, which apply to individual documents and messages. So how do you apply these labels in practice? Once published, users will see the label option when creating a new team, SharePoint site, Microsoft 365 group, or Power BI workspace. So in this example in Teams, what we can do is create a team. We can give our team a name and a description, and we can choose the team type and the sensitivity. So if we click onto here, we can set our type in terms of privacy, private, public, or org-wide, and we can set the sensitivity label. And setting that label will determine what we can do in terms of that privacy and whether or not things like guests can be added. Now, I'll not go through every example, But in SharePoint, it controls external sharing and access from unmanaged devices. In Power BI, it governs data sharing and workspace privacy. And in Microsoft 365 Groups, it affects group visibility and collaboration settings. Admins can also apply labels retroactively using PowerShell or Microsoft Graph. And you may be asked about this sort of thing in the exam, so do make sure to look into some of the commands for Graph and PowerShell across this topic, and indeed all topics across SC 401. To monitor and manage, use the Microsoft Purview portal to monitor that label usage across your containers. You can use your explorers, particularly Activity Explorer, to view label distribution, audit changes to container settings, and adjust label policies as needed. And this helps ensure your collaboration spaces are going to remain secure and compliant. Let's wrap up with some exam tips. To recap, container labels apply to Teams, SharePoint, M365 Groups, and Power BI. They control privacy, sharing, and access settings, and you can create and publish them via Microsoft Purview. For the SC 401 exam, make sure you understand how these labels differ from the file and email labels and how they impact collaboration security. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit subscribe, like, and the bell, and join me next time where we'll integrate sensitivity labels with Defender for Cloud apps for even deeper protection. For now, do take care, stay safe, and travel well. Bye-bye.